Well, Europe's obviously ground zero for the financial crisis at the moment, but it's not hard to find signs of economic doom wherever you look. Australia's been pretty immune, though, because of our trade with China. China sailed through the last global financial crisis virtually unscathed, and this time around things seem to be panning out exactly the same. But how long will this Asian giant's voracious appetite for Australian resources continue? China correspondent Stephen McDonald checks the economic temperature in the Middle Kingdom.
We're seeing a developing pattern of fairly short cycles, a lot of boom-bust.
We actually want China's economy to slow down a bit.
The Asian powerhouse, the world's factory, the new global investment superpower. The hyperboles about China keep coming, with it posting yet another quarter of breakneck 9% growth. But is this activity really sustainable in the current climate? The Chinese government doesn't think so.
It isn't possible to maintain this speed in the long term, so we shouldn't worry too much about any slowing down of growth speed.
Liu Zhongyuan is a senior economic advisor to the Chinese government. He wants his country to produce fewer but better products. The ABC asked him if he could see China buying Australian raw materials in the same quantities as it is now in the coming years.
That all depends on prices rather than demand stemming from Chinese growth. If the price is too high, it won't be possible for us to import as much. But if the price drops significantly, then we might import a lot.
Others think that China will keep buying vast quantities of Australian iron ore despite the current record prices.
China is going to continue to be one of the major, if not the major, consumer of raw materials from around the world. And it's going to be looking for natural resources wherever it can get them.
American economist Paul Gillis, who's currently based at Peking University, is broadly optimistic about the Chinese economy. But he sees major challenges here as Chinese factories start losing international customers.
If we don't see a recovery in the U.S. and European economies, I think the picture for exports is not as good as it has been in recent years.
But every year China relies less and less on exports. The domestic car market, for example, is now the largest in the world, with 18 million sales over the last 12 months. And as companies turn their attention to Chinese buyers, they're escaping the clutches of global financial turmoil. Jiameng Precision Casting Company produces parts from molten metal. The foundry on the coast from Beijing took a hit from the last global financial crisis when orders from the United States dropped off. But since then, the business has changed.
We had mainly produced parts for textile industry machines or other tools. Now we're shifting our focus to parts for cars and other equipment.
You'd expect a drop in clothing sales to Europe to hurt a company like this, which still makes parts for textile machines. But the orders keep coming in. That's because Chinese clothing companies are now selling more locally where demand remains strong. Despite predictions that the wheels might somehow fall off here, China continues to charge along economically at what seems to be an unstoppable rate. While in other countries it's all talk of doom and gloom, this country remains remarkably optimistic. And that optimism is not without foundation. This company, for example, had a 30% increase in sales over the past year. Its managers say the challenge they face is to be able to grow quickly enough.
We need to increase our current production capacity by 3 or 5 times in order to meet expected demand. I think it will take about 1 year to reach that goal.
The more metal that China uses, the more Australian raw materials it'll require. This company also buys Australian zircon in bulk. It needs zircon to make the moulds for its products. So much so that it's willing to pay 4 times as much for Australian zircon compared to what it was just 3 years ago. But there are frailties in the Chinese economy, with economists predicting a looming drop in housing construction.
The Chinese government has its hands on the levers. The reason the Chinese housing market is slowing is not because of what's going on in Europe, nothing to do with exports. It's purely because the Chinese government is worried about the politics of high housing prices, and they've banned an enormous part of the population from even buying a house at the moment.
Beijing-based Australian economist Stephen Joske says Chinese policymakers are forcing down house prices by controlling who gets permission to buy property. This could soon lead to less building, meaning less need for steel, hence less iron ore, which could hurt Australian resource companies. In addition, the Chinese government's stimulus measures following the last financial crisis are coming to an end, which also means less infrastructure spending.
I think what we're seeing is China still has very strong needs in infrastructure, which aren't going to stop, but the pace will ease down. And if we combine that with an expected easing in housing construction, we'll see some easing in commodity demand.
Yet most China watchers are predicting only a short, sharp correction, and that in the long run, unless there's some sort of major social upheaval, China's boom will still have a long way to run.